I'm going to share a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. Again, my name is Mara Walsh. I am coming to you from the US, specifically between Philadelphia and New York. For many of you that reached out during our floods of last week, I appreciate your concern. Luckily, where I sit, I am not in a flood zone, but certainly very close to our home was a lot of devastation. So thanks for reaching out. I started leading physical tours with EF Tours and Go Ahead Tours. And I also use many other tour operators for my group travel. But since we're unable to travel physically, that led me to the virtual tour arena. There's a couple of reasons why I started this virtual tour series. I really wanted to support the tour director community during this time of travel restrictions where they have not been able to work. And I really wanted to keep the excitement of travel alive for my travel group and extend that opportunity to those of you who have learned about us through your friends, your family, and social media. We've done more than 50 tours since COVID struck. If you'd like to access any of them, the recordings are available on my website, girltraveltours.com. You can also access them through my Facebook page or my YouTube channel. And we have several more tours lined up for the coming months. I'm just going to share a slide with you so that you can see them, but we're going to be doing Communism in the Eastern Bloc, Salzburg, the Sound of Music tour, Milan, Mystery in Transylvania, which is in Halloween time, Northern Spain, and Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. Check back often as we do add new destinations at all times. As long as you're interested in viewing these virtual tour presentations, we will continue to produce them for you. I know many of you found me and my virtual tours on Facebook, so I did just want to give a warning out there. You should have not paid to access this virtual tour. The access to the virtual tours is free. If you did pay some organization on Facebook or a organization to get the link to this, unfortunately, that is a scam, and you should report it to your credit card or whatever means of payment you made. Because honestly, I don't know if they're using these credit card numbers for anything else, or if they're just trying to pick up a buck here and there. But please know that you can always safely access our events through my website, which is girltraveltours.com. You can also view them on my Facebook page. Okay. I want to review a few ways for you to interact with us during this event. Feel free to ask questions using the Q&A mechanism on the Zoom toolbar. Those questions will be read out after the tour, and we will go through them live online. If you want to chat with me or give me a message, you can use it through the chat. Those are not read, but I'll do my best to respond to them throughout the event. And as always, I like to include an interactive poll. So I'm going to launch the poll now. This poll gives us an opportunity to understand what your connection is with Yellowstone National Park. The first answer is I've been and love it. I have a trip booked. I plan to go in the future. I have no set plans, but I'm interested in the location. I am solely interested in experiencing this virtually. I'll give you a second as you put your responses in the poll. I actually am planning a trip to go to the national parks next year. I have not been myself to Yellowstone, so I am really looking forward to this presentation. I'm going to end the poll and share the results because they're pretty interesting. So it looks like about 32% of you who have already been to Yellowstone, which is awesome. There's a small percent that have a trip booked, and there's a lot of you who plan to go in the future or are interested in the location. And if history serves correctly, I would imagine that many of you who aren't planning to go after this presentation, you will be changing your plans. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. If the poll does not come down from your screen, just click on the little red dot in the top left to get it out of your viewing. Let's see. Today's tour and all of our tours are scheduled for 90 minutes. Usually it's a little bit more than an hour in presentation and then Q&A, and the Q&A will run longer than 90 minutes and we'll stay on for as long as it takes to answer the questions. So if you are not ready yet with a snack or a drink, you might want to run and get something before we get started. A tour wouldn't be complete without a fantastic tour guide. These are by far the most important people in any travel group. And I'll share with you via the chat and the Q&A how you can tip today's guide if you appreciate this presentation and our guide's shared experience with you. All of the tips go directly to the tour guide once collected, minus the Zoom operating expenses. And today we are lucky to have straight from Yellowstone National Park, Ashea. She is a park expert, and I'm sure that you will see just why she loves it so much during this presentation. I just want to preface by saying this is an educational presentation. We do mimic our educational tours through these virtual tour presentations. So please know that it will be a combination of education, history, pictures, fun, and the journey through the park. I'd like to welcome Ashea to join us at this time. Ashea, if you're ready, just come on and unmute yourself and I can hand over this event to you and then you can share your screen and get us going. Welcome, Ashea.
Thank you so much, Mara. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my love and my passion, which is Yellowstone National Park. I've been here for almost 30 years, and I'm gonna start screen sharing here. I've been guiding for about 25. Okay,
You're perfect.
We're looking good? Okay, and just let me know, Mara, if anything gets wonky here. I just got a slightly concerning message. I am plugged in, but hopefully, what a wild world we live in now where we can do this. And I just loved seeing where all of you are from, literally around the world, coast to coast. That's really exciting for me to know that you're there in your home space and joining me in mine. I'm grateful for the technology that we have, but bear with me through these first few slides. I do love Yellowstone. But the first few slides will show some maps, and I want to give us a sense of place, not just geographically, in other ways too, but I was so grateful to see folks from literally around the world, very exciting, and across our continent, of course. So I'm up here in the Northern Rockies. You can see that orange box, that's Yellowstone Park. The green area around it is the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And I actually hand drew in some of our important waterways. Our snowpack is going to provide a lot of drinking water, hydroelectric power, agriculture, commerce. A lot of the rest of the continent's water flows off of the Yellowstone Plateau. You can see the green in Colorado drainages, the Snake in Columbia. 2 of the 3 forks of the Missouri start up here in Yellowstone, as well as the Yellowstone River, which is the major tributary to the Missouri. So the breadbasket, all of that is our snowpack. And most of our water will end up over in the Atlantic Ocean. We're just, the continental divide actually cuts through Yellowstone. But let's zoom in on that green area. Again, just kind of giving us a sense of place. We are in the heart of what we call the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. It's a vast area. It's roughly the size of Maine, about 19 million acres, depending on where you draw that boundary line. And lots of different types of management. So we have national forest under the Department of Agriculture. We have, of course, the national parks under the Department of the Interior, tribal lands, private homes, ranches. I'm in the GYE. I'm right up here. Let's see if we can see my mouse. I'm right here in the town of Gardner. So just right on the northern boundary of Yellowstone. And let's zoom in a little bit more to Yellowstone Park proper. This is the map they hand you when you drive in the gate. This is the world's first national park. I labeled it first and best. Anywhere that you go, you can find wildlife elsewhere. You'll find canyons and rivers and mountains in other parts of the world. But I think Yellowstone encompasses the best of all of those. It's a huge area, close to 3,500 square miles, about 9,000 square kilometers. So it's enormous. If you think you're going to do Yellowstone in a few hours, you'll be a little bit sad that you didn't plan for some extra time, at least a couple of days to see the main highlights, I would say. And what we have is a figure-8 road system here. You can kind of see the lower loop here and then the upper loop. And we're going to start down here. We're actually going to drop into the Tetons because if you're in the neighborhood, you ought to go take a look at those mountains. We're going to cruise north up along the Lewis River Canyon up to the west. We'll I'm getting another error message. On Mara, let me know you can see me. Mara,
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, okay, very good. I'm sorry, folks. We're going to cruise along the shore of Yellowstone Lake. We'll make our way out the east road, kind of heading towards Cody. We're actually going to do a short hike over here at Storm Point, make our way up to the eastern boundary line, where if you notice this kind of jaggedy eastern boundary line, when Yellowstone was first set aside, it was just a big box around most of the geothermal features. That was the big important thing back in 1872. That was what was unique, the geysers and the hot springs. Since then, we've learned a lot more about migration corridors and waterways, hydrology. And so that eastern boundary line now follows the Absaroka Mountains. And then we'll cut back into the park and go through Hayden Valley up to the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, make our way over here to the heart of the geysers and hot springs, continue on north to the upper loop, making some stops along the way. And then we'll wrap up out here in Lamar Valley, what they call the American Serengeti. But before I bounce off of this slide, I want you to notice, I took the liberty of adding an extra Sharpie line, this kind of roughly amorphous circle. That is the crater, we call it a caldera, of the largest volcano on Earth, at least here on land. There might be some bigger ones under the ocean. But like I said, at its heart, Yellowstone is a geologic park. That's what set it aside to begin with. So we're going to talk a lot about being in that volcano. And just before I flip off this slide, Yellowstone is home to dozens of species of mammals, hundreds of native flowering plants, birds, amphibians, reptiles, trees. It is a wild, wide open space. Now I'm going to take this map and kind of tip it upright. So take a look here and you can see this green boundary line, that's Yellowstone Park, all 2.2 million acres of it. The red circle is the most recent caldera eruption. The last time that Yellowstone erupted, it was about 640,000 years ago, maybe give or take a few days. But look at what we think is below us. Our scientists have been mapping this giant magma plume, this pressure that's pushing us up, actually a couple thousand feet higher than we should be when you're in Yellowstone. You're on this giant plateau. For most of you, anywhere in the world, if you go out in your backyard and you start digging, you might have to go 50 miles, maybe 80 kilometers before you get to any kind of molten material. But here in Yellowstone, we have a magma heat source within maybe 3 to 5 miles, just a few kilometers. And so that is going to determine a lot of what we are seeing today. We'll be touring in a Ford Expedition. That's my company, Walking Shadow Ecology Tours of Yellowstone, and some information there for those of you doing some trip planning. Definitely keep us in mind when you can make it here in person. But like I said, let's start just south of the park. The Grand Tetons are an extraordinary mountain range, and it's an entirely different national park. It's its own entity. But if you're in the neighborhood, you ought to try and go get a glimpse at these huge mountains, the Grand up there, running about 7,000 feet of mountain just right in front of you, about 2,100 meters. So some of the tallest relief mountains in the world from base to peak, and definitely a technical climb, not something to do lightly when you head into these mountains. But let's head north. And right now we are at the south boundary line. You can see the Snake River there in the distance. And as we do drive north, hooking up with that Grand Loop road system, we're going to follow the Lewis River. And what we are also following is an old lava flow. So it doesn't feel like you're in a big bowl a lot of times. Those of you that have been to Crater Lake or Haleakala or other volcanoes around the world, it doesn't give you a sense of being in a big bowl, for one thing, because it's so huge, 1,000 square miles, just the crater, about 2,600 kilometers. But also that bowl has gotten filled in with these lava flows, these rhyolite lava flows. And often as we crest into the caldera boundary, you have two different kinds of rocks that are side by side, and water will work its magic on one side a little more than the other. And we do end up with hundreds of waterfalls all across the Yellowstone Plateau. A lot of Yellowstone looks like this, driving through a corridor of trees. Those are not mountains in the distance. This picture is a little deceiving. Those are just some wispy clouds there in the distance. But You have to get out of your car when you're in Yellowstone. Otherwise, a lot of it does look like this, just traveling through a forested plateau. About 80% of Yellowstone is forested. And 80% of those trees are what you see here, lodgepole pines. So it can feel a little bit like a monoforest. Definitely important to get off the road, at least onto the more developed areas, if not into the backcountry. We're going to cross the Continental Divide, leaving the western side and moving into the eastern side. And most of the plateau is between about 7,500 and 8,500 feet. So we're up a good bit for those of you down in the flatlands. And we're going to get up here to the shores of Yellowstone Lake. The Absaroka Mountains there in the distance, you can see that jaggedy eastern boundary line of the park. And the first of our thermal features. Now, we have changed our minds a lot over the last 149 years. We're coming up on an anniversary next year about what a national park even is. Is it a pleasuring ground for the benefit and enjoyment of the people, like our Organic Act says? Yes, absolutely. But we've learned a lot about how fragile these features are. So back in the day, you could actually cast your line, catch a trout, turn around and cook it in the fishing cone, which at low water later in the season, you can walk out to if it were legal. At this point, it's in the spring, and so the lake level is up a little higher. We surely have learned a ton about how to manage our national parks and how to protect them and be a lot more careful with how we treat them. But remember that picture that I showed you of the land with the big magma plume below us? Imagine you're cooking you're going to bake an apple pie and you've got that crust and you have to do something to it before you put it in the oven. You have to poke holes in the top to vent some of the steam and pressure and heat that will build under that crust. Imagine us here on the crust of the earth, and we have fork holes, and these are they. This is one of our hot springs. This is helping to release some of the heat and pressure that is below us. If you were to pave over Yellowstone, we'd blow up tomorrow. There's that saying about eyes being windows into the soul. And there's a great geology book about Yellowstone called Windows into the Earth. And when you look into these hot springs, we are literally looking into the heart and soul of Earth. We'll talk a little bit more about these colors here down the way. But for the moment, let's head north. We're going to head up along the shores of Yellowstone Lake, an enormous alpine lake. In fact, we call it the largest alpine lake in North America. Tahoe is a little bit bigger than us, but a little bit lower. Only about maybe 40, 35 or so miles of shoreline that you can traverse in your car, but 141 miles around, just a gigantic lake full of, most of which is in the wilds in the backcountry, particularly along the Absaroka Mountains over there. Might catch a glimpse of the Lake Hotel upon approaching the North Shore. The Lake Hotel is a little bit different from a lot of the rest of the architecture in the park, what we call parkitecture, more rustic buildings that sort of blend into their surroundings. Back when this building was first built in 1891, it was kind of a boring old railroad structure. It was actually the Northern Pacific Railroad that pushed a lot of the impetus for creating Yellowstone. They wanted to have a destination for their passengers. And so Senator Pomeroy, that actually introduced the bill into the United States Congress, signed by Ulysses S. Grant on March 1st, 1872. He was a railroad guy. And so they began building these hotels, but Robert Reamer, a young architect, got his hands on this over the course of the early 1900s. And he had this idea of a grand lady of the lake. And so he pulled out the ionic columns and the dormers. And one of my favorite things to do in Yellowstone is go into the Reamer sunroom and listen to the string quartet that plays for about 6 weeks during the summer months. And if you have the chance to stay in the Lake Hotel, it's a fabulous, elegant experience. The rooms are not the least expensive in the park. You can stay in a cabin out behind the hotel for about $250. Lakeside rooms will run you closer to probably about $600, all the way on up to the presidential suite if you really want to treat yourself for about $1,000 a night. But just an incredibly beautiful and peaceful place to stay. So continuing on, we're actually going to jump off of that Grand Loop Road and head east on our eastern entrance road, crossing over the fishing bridge, which is a little incongruously named because we don't fish off of the fishing bridge anymore. Again, changing our minds and understanding a little bit more about how ecosystems work. This was the year before they closed it to fishing, when we realized that some of the best spawning habitat for our native cutthroat trout was right below the fishing bridge. So we don't fish off of the fishing bridge anymore. But that is the very beginning of the Yellowstone River. If you turn around and look behind us here, looking back south, there's 156 inlet streams that flow into Yellowstone Lake, but only one way out. And that is the mighty Yellowstone, all 671 miles of which are still running as wild and free as they ever did, all the way over to the North Dakota border where it joins the Missouri. No dams anywhere along the length. So a fitting beginning to the Yellowstone River. And let's continue on just a little bit east of here. I'd love to take you for a short walk. You can see Indian Pond there behind us. Now, much more common than a big, gigantic caldera eruption that would probably alter life on Earth is a hydrothermal explosion, just a subterranean body of water that blows and fills in and creates some of our ponds. This is right on the shores of Yellowstone Lake. So we're gonna take a hike out to Storm Point and check out our trail map here. You can see over here on the left-hand side, you are here. You can see Indian Pond. We're gonna go in a counterclockwise way out to Storm Point proper, make our way through the woods back to the trailhead. But with following our leave no trace ethics, we have to take a look and plan ahead and be prepared. We've checked the weather, and we know that anytime we step off the road in Yellowstone, we are in bear country. And you must carry your bear spray. I don't leave home without it. Anytime I'm off the road, I have bear spray strapped to my body. I've never had to use bear spray. I've had it out and unholstered a few times. My husband actually sprayed a bear. That was exciting. Everything worked out okay. But for the most part, if you're making noise out there and you're paying attention and being alert, you're going to have a safe experience. We do advise hiking in parties of more than 3 people. But on this day, I went out with just my daughter. It's a fairly popular trail. And there are bears out there. This is on the trail. And this grizzly scratch has been there about as long as I've been around. That's my daughter's hand for comparison. But on this day, we did find some bear scat on the trail. Probably black bear, judging by the size. It was maybe, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches across, fairly small. But take a look at this bear scat, and you can see down here, you can see some berries, some seeds in there, and a little bit of grass. And so even though our bears are omnivorous, for the most part, this is what they're eating. They're just eating grass and vegetation, flowers. This young grizzly sow was being kind of lazy this day. She was munching at her little area, and then she'd do kind of an army crawl forward and eat out the next little patch of grass. Now I know this is a grizzly because check out that hump. And let's learn a little bit about both black bears and grizzly bears here in Yellowstone. This was a few years back.
I think you're going to have to talk through this one, Ashea, because we can't hear the audio.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Yes, we're noticing the hump on his shoulder. That is, and also those big, gigantic claws my daughter is asking about. And then we noticed that he was taking care of business out there. But noticing that big hump, that muscle that's helped designed for digging primarily. Okay, I actually have a grizzly claw here just for a comparison. Long arced, best for digging. A black bear, just for comparison, a much smaller and arced claw, better for climbing trees. And of course, we do have black bears here. About half of our black bears, though, are not black. They are this cinnamon color, but here's a good rule of thumb. If the rump is higher than the hump, it's a black bear. If the hump is higher than the rump, then it's a grizzly bear. And you can have black bears that have offspring of a different shade, a different color, certainly just depending on genetics and recessive genes and such. And those cubs are so much fun to have around. It is such an honor and a privilege to live in a place with big enough habitat requirements for these bears. So every time we head out on the trail, we certainly want to be aware of the fact that we are in grizzly habitat. So here we are out at Storm Point, having made noise as we've walked through the forest and getting out to this big, wide open view on the shores of Yellowstone Lake. We're actually going to take a quick run up Avalanche Peak, that shadowed flat top ridge out there in the distance. It's easy when you're in Yellowstone to get caught up in seeing all the main sights, but I do encourage you to take some time to just watch and listen and find some quiet space. We're looking at Grand Tetons down there, still about 50 miles or so south of us from this end. And then as we look southwest and westward, we lose those big mountains. Those are those rolling timbered hills, those old lava flows that have filled in the bowl and make it so that that deep caldera crater is not as deep as it once was. So we'll follow those hikers and continue on our trail as we head into the woods, and always take a moment to look up and enjoy this forested plateau. And a quick run up Avalanche Peak, and by that I mean a burly hike. It's only a couple of miles, but it's about 2,000 feet up. So good exercise, but we climb mountains to get these incredible views looking back over Yellowstone Lake. And while we are enjoying these big, broad views, don't forget to look down at what's at your feet. Wildflower season, mostly through the thick of July, late June, July, early August, is an extraordinary season in Yellowstone. That's Yellowstone's official flower, the fringed gentian. Hundreds of species of flowering plants, including one of my favorites, the elephant heads. Can you see how each individual flower head looks just like an elephant head? I just love those. Sago lilies, a good root that's edible there. Lupin, bitterroot, mostly you would find closer to where I am now, kind of down in the high desert, the northern parts of Yellowstone. Just a riot of color and shapes, every which type of flower up here on the Yellowstone Plateau. Sometimes in the deep, dark woods, you might catch some of our more rare plants like the fairy slippers. So we have made our way north along the shores of Yellowstone Lake and out here to Avalanche Peak. We're going to drive back in and hook up with this lower loop and make our way through Hayden Valley to the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone before we drop over here to the heart of the Geyser country and then continue on north after that. But let's drive through Hayden Valley, the Yellowstone River, arcing its way gracefully through this huge wide open space. Not a lot of Yellowstone looks like this, but this is a fantastic place to be looking for wildlife, including the largest land mammal in North America, our bison. Bison and buffalo, same thing, just sort of a different term for them. If you want to be scientifically accurate, they are bison. And if you see one on their own, it's these big old antisocial bulls. They hang out on their own. The larger herds tend to be the calves and the mamas. And we're just now finishing up the bison mating season, which is pretty exciting. These big bulls will pee into a wallow and then roll around and dust themselves and get up and stick out their long pointed purple tongue and bellow. And that's what suffices for the bison mating season. But 9 months later, their gestation is just like ours. This is what we have. We got to watch this calf drop and watch mama clean it up and let it take its first steps out there. And like I mentioned, it is a matriarchal herd. So these old mama cows that know where the good grass grows, they will lead the herd around, and the playful calves are getting a little more serious this time of year. They know the days are getting short and everybody is just eating and eating, but it's exciting to live with these large herds, around 4,000 bison that populate Yellowstone. Very resilient animals. It's it's like they figured it out a long time ago and they haven't had to change a whole lot since. They're just perfectly adapted for these harsh winter conditions as well as our summers. So we're going to leave Hayden Valley at our backs, the calm, wide, placid Yellowstone River making its way through Hayden Valley. And around the corner, all of a sudden, it takes this dive 109 feet over the upper fall. Now take a look at that rock, just kind of a grayish, brownish, normal looking rock. That's one of those rhyolite lava flows, but look what happens around the corner. It drops 3 times that height at 308 feet, about 94 meters, into the heart of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. This place would make a national park anywhere else in the world, and it's just one of the gorgeous aspects of Yellowstone. As we look downstream, we're literally looking into the guts of an old geyser basin. So at times past, when this flow was solid, there was a geyser basin, and all of that hot water and heat moving through this rhyolite cooked it and weakened it and altered it. And in the wintertime, you can actually still see some steam. You can still see a little bit of steam rising there at the bottom of your screen. This is early winter, so the water is still flowing. It changes dramatically over the course of the season. By late winter, we have this huge ice cone that builds up. That's almost probably about the size of Niagara Falls, just that cone that freezes over from the mist falling off of the falls, even when it's somewhat frozen over. Niagara is 156 feet, and this waterfall is 308, so almost twice the height. And it changes every minute. Every day I've seen this scene and hiked its ridges and rims hundreds of times, and it looks a little bit different at moment by moment throughout the course of the day, and certainly over the course of the season. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And let's head over to the west side of the park now. Let's go explore the thermal features. This is Great Fountain Geyser, one of hundreds, thousands, 10 to 14,000 thermal features in the park, and they all have the same ingredients. They all have heat, that magma source that we talked about. They all have water that fell out of the sky as rain or snow, and some of it percolated down and got near that heat source. And then some kind of a plumbing system. Now, if the water boils away before we see it, we just see steam coming out of the ground like a tea kettle. This we call a fumarole. Steam and probably some gases, might catch a whiff of hydrogen sulfide here. That rotten egg smell. Now, if you bring enough water right up to the surface, then you have a hot spring. So just like the funnel that you have that you put oil into your car, a bowl with a pipe or a tube that goes down towards that heat source. This is Sapphire Pool, and this is a hot spring. I know that because of that clear blue water against the white lining, the sinter, the silica that's been dissolved out of that lava flow and deposited here on the surface. Once the water cools down, that's where we start to get the dramatic colors. The hottest color of the cyanobacteria, we call it, these little extremophiles, these little microorganisms that live in Yellowstone's hot springs, they can't survive about 167 degrees Fahrenheit, 73 C. So once the water cools down, then we start to see these dramatic colors, billions and billions of little microscopic creatures in our hot springs that create this color. Morning Glory Pool is a cautionary tale. This used to be on the side of the road. Now it's just on a boardwalk. But we have pulled all kinds of things out of our hot springs. Clothing, frying pans, a tire, $100 worth of coins that got pulled out of Morning Glory. So what happens is if you clog up that vent, you clog up that heat source, the water cools down, and we get these incredible colors. The cyanobacteria, scientists are here studying it. This is some of the most biodiverse regions on Earth. The rainforest has got nothing on us. And these little microorganisms that grow in the runoff channels of Yellowstone's hot springs are being used for so many things, forensics and medicine and biofuels. We could have the cures for the common cold here in Yellowstone's hot springs. We have astrobiologists studying our microorganisms, because this is some of the first stuff on Earth to colonize, using sunlight for food and producing oxygen. And if you take a look at this silica buildup around the edge of a hot spring, it has a biosignature, the way that the the mineral builds up and the presence of life creates these certain, the visual of these kind of textures. And so up on Mars right now, they're looking for rocks that might look like this. This could help us define the presence of life on other planets. Of course, Grand Prismatic is one of the most famous hot springs in the world. It's the largest in Yellowstone, third largest on the planet. There's a sense of scale there. And there's a little overlook you can climb to get this view. Go in the afternoon when it's hot and you'll not have so much steam obscuring it. And even if you understand the science behind the colors, just taking in these incredible views are, boy, sometimes it'll just bring you to your knees, the beauty of Yellowstone. Now, mud pots are a little bit different. Rather than the cyanobacteria, mud pots have chemosynthesizers. There's a little organism that lives in here that eats elemental sulfur, and the byproduct is sulfuric acid. So it never allows that hard shell to fully form. Again, we're catching a whiff of sulfur here. Mostly carbon dioxide. It looks like boiling mud, but it's actually not boiling, not quite hot enough to boil. These are just gas vents. When I have the kids along, we like to talk about big giant earth farts. And geysers are a little bit different. They still have all the same ingredients, but have you ever taken your thumb and put it over a garden hose and you get that extra pressure? Geysers are hot springs that somewhere down in that plumbing system have a constriction where the water gets superheated below and eventually will blow. And we are in the largest geyser field on Earth. You can find them elsewhere, but about 2/3 of the geysers on the planet are here in Yellowstone. We've got tall ones and short ones and predictable ones and unpredictable ones. Sometimes you get that silica buildup right here on the surface of the Earth, and you get some interesting patterns, including when animals walk through that bacteria mat and might leave their mark for a temporary bit before the bacteria grows back in. This is right outside of the Old Faithful area, the Castle Geyser. Every single one of them has their own personality and their own characteristic. If you're willing to do about a 5-mile hike, you can get back to Lone Star Geyser. Let's take a second and watch an erupting geyser, one of my very favorites. Great, I'm sorry, this is Fountain Geyser, the lower geyser basin. Got to catch it on a beautiful sunset evening a couple years back. You're here in the lower geyser basin at the fountain paint pots. You are surrounded by geysers, so it's kind of exciting when they're all erupting at the same time. Just a 360 view.
Mama. What? Whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, that sparkling is so pretty. Oh, that sparkling is so pretty on the shot.
I know, it's perfect.
And this is a predictable geyser if someone's paying attention to it. It's not always on the boards, on the prediction boards, but if you can catch it, it's a fun one to catch. It goes anywhere from about 5 to 9 hours apart. And of course, everyone wants to see Old Faithful. And this is mostly what it looks like, not always with a rainbow in there, but I thought you'd appreciate that. But it's always puffing and steaming away and just shockingly predictable. About every hour and a half or so, it will blow. And my very favorite photograph of Old Faithful, of all the dozens of pictures, I don't have a single good one, but my friend Lisa Culpepper, who is a professional photographer, captured this image at -25 degrees one winter. Winter in Yellowstone is extraordinary. It's my favorite time of the year. It takes a lot more doing to get into the park. You can only get to Old Faithful or Lake or Canyon via snowmobile or snow coach for a limited winter season. But if you have the means and can plan ahead of time, it's a really extraordinary time of year. And Old Faithful's still kicking night and day, summer and winter, erupting on average, like I said, about every hour and a half. While we're here, let's pop into the Old Faithful Inn. The inn is closed in the wintertime, so that's there is some lodging in the area, the Old Faithful Snow Lodge. But the Old Faithful Inn is such an extraordinary building. Robert Reamer, that I mentioned earlier, that young architect that was here, went over at this same time frame to go build up the Lake Hotel to the Grand Lady of the Lake that we have today. But notice the asymmetry of the dormers and of the windows. He had in mind to create an experience that when you walk into the Old Faithful Inn, that it's like walking into a forest, and a soaring ceiling 7 stories high, sort of shafts of sunlight shining down on you from different angles, all locally used wood. He had his men go out and find interesting pieces of wood to use. That's the crow's nest, inaccessible to the public these days, but back in the early days when you would come in on a railroad, you would bring your fine gowns and tuxedos, and there would be ballroom dancing as the string quartet played up in the crow's nest of an evening. Lots of interesting burled wood and wood with textures from beetles, locally quarried rhyolite, those old lava flows, to build this gigantic fireplace that is still in use, and a clock that was made just up in Livingston, Montana, and shipped down in the winter on sleds as they were building the Old Faithful Inn. Now, this part is not accessible to the public, but since you're with me, we're going to take a run up to the very top of the Old Faithful Inn and take down the flags with our bellhop. This is my dear friend, Virgie, who's bellhopped in the lake for a number of years. And we're taking down the Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho state flags, as well as the American flag at the end of the day, the 3 states that share Yellowstone. And then come back in and grab a drink in the bear pit, maybe listen to Martha play her cello or her grand piano as you enjoy a book or conversation with friends and family around the Old Faithful Inn before you retire to your room for the night. I just took a close-up of this because I love the ironwork that's used throughout the Old Faithful Inn. And it is a rustic experience in what we call the old house. There's more modern rooms down on the east and west wings. Most of the old house rooms don't have a restroom in the room. It's common restrooms. A few do, including this fun old pull toilet, pull chain toilet, clawfoot tubs. A geyser side room might run you about maybe $300, $250 to $300 for a room in the old house, and maybe about twice that in one of the more modern wings. But even if you just pop in for a few minutes or an hour to wander around the Old Faithful Inn, it's a neat experience. If you're here in the evening, you can go out and watch Old Faithful with far less than the thousands of people that throng there in the middle of a hot day in the summer, and enjoy an evening look. Now, most of these photographs are mine. This one, Neil Herbert took with the National Park Service. So you'll see that little NPS logo down there if it's not my photograph. But we have extraordinary night skies. And if you're here, do take the time to walk outside and appreciate the Milky Way, satellites passing over, and this extraordinary universe that we get to call home. So here we are. We're going to leave the geysers. Now there's hot springs all over Yellowstone, but we're going to leave the thick of them, make our way up by Gibbon Falls, make a brief stop at Obsidian Cliff, get to Mammoth, and wander out towards the northeast entrance off of that upper loop road. Gibbon Falls, like I said, a lot of times right along the boundary lines of our caldera boundary, we have 2 different types of rock, one of which is eroded more easily, and we end up with one of our hundreds of waterfalls. And I want to pause here at Obsidian Cliff. This is sort of just a roadside attraction as you're driving by, but this is an incredibly important place culturally, not just geologically. We have found obsidian from this exact cliff as far away as the mountains of Ohio and Georgia. It was a quarry site for thousands and thousands of years, and you can still find evidence of the people who have lived on the Yellowstone Plateau for 11,000 years. Kind of a misstep in our early park history, that the story we were told was it was an untrammeled wilderness, just bound for national parkdom in the future. But the reality is that people have lived up on this plateau going back to when the ice melted away 11,000 years ago. I want to point out that spear point down in the bottom right of your screen that I did not find. These other pieces I just found out and following our leave no trace ethics left where I found them. But this spear point on the right, that take a look at my hand and see how big that is. The person who hunted with that spear point that's now in our Heritage and Research Center was hunting something like a woolly mammoth, an old Clovis spear point. But what's really important to know is that these people are still here. When the park was first established, the Tukudika or sheep eater were still using the plateau as well as other tribes. The mountain Shoshone or Tukudika would use everything you've heard about bison and being able to get clothing and shelter and tools and utensils out of an animal. They would use the bighorn sheep that dominated the Yellowstone Plateau. So they would take the horns of those big horns, and you can see up here on top, this is a photograph from our archives. They would slice it with probably an obsidian scraper and then soak it in hot spring water to straighten it out like this, and then tie two back to back with a little bit of sinew, which you can see up here in your top left screen, and create some of the best weaponry, regionally renowned weaponry, and of course, access to that high grade obsidian. So incredible hunters, a very healthy population of people. And I do want to take a moment to give a lands acknowledgement. We are in Crow country. Here's a picture of some chert on the right-hand side. That's another one of our lithic or stone resources. But these people are still here. I mentioned the Absaroka Mountains. That's a version of the word Apsalica that you see on the Crow Nation flag down there. That's their name for themselves, and they're still here, as well as the Nez Perce, the Nimipu, the Northern Cheyenne or Titsas in their own language, the Mountain Shoshone that I mentioned earlier, the Abskapi Baguni, the Blackfeet people. They didn't go away. They still live here, and they still find this land to be precious and sacred and consider it homelands. And so we are working now, the Park Service is working much more towards reconciliation with these tribes. This is over at the Intertribal Powwow held in Cody every June at the Buffalo Bill Historic Museum. That's the grand entry. And then just this past June, for the first time in 150 years, a teepee was raised in Yellowstone. This is down just about 100 yards or so from my house. We have a lot of work to do to reconcile and make sure that the story that's being told is a fair and true one. We've come a long way from my early years here in Yellowstone when I was told that a small group of Indians were rounded up and shipped off to the reservation where they died out as a race. And I did live here for 10 years before I learned there are near still full-blood sheep eater living just down the road, down south of the Grand Teton Park. So a lot of work to do, and but I'm happy to say that things are in a forward motion to make sure that we're including all voices in Yellowstone. While we're down here in Gardner, Montana, right on the northern edge of Yellowstone, let's take a look kind of away from the arch, and you can find elk. There's about 10,000 elk in Yellowstone. All over the plateau, you'll find them. That's Electric Peak that dominates the Gardner Basin. And of course, everybody wants to see the bulls, the big male elk, and those big gigantic racks. They have been growing all season. If you see a bull elk in the early season, they don't look as much as regal as they do this time of year. It looks kind of soft. It's, we call it velvet, and that's actually an external blood vessel system that's helping to grow this bone. And then they will drop that rack after the elk rut, the elk mating season is done. So all season long, they're pumping a bunch of energy into growing that rack so that they can fend off other potential suitors for their females. And then they'll drop the rack when they don't need it. Now you can go out to Jackson and find a $5,000 elk antler chandelier, but again, with our leave no trace ethics, we leave what we find, whether that's a spear point or bones or antlers, and everything has a purpose. So these antlers that are dropped by the bull elk in the late winter are used as a calcium source for some of our little creatures that will gnaw away at that hard bone. So we just leave what we find. And again, about 9 months later, our elk calves are born the following June. And these little young ones were enjoying this soft green grass. But of course, elk have to keep their heads up and pay attention all the time because, as you can see here, there's 2 wolves. There's one down here. I'll circle it with my mouse there. There was actually about 5 wolves in this scene. And again, another mistake that we made, we hated wolves and did everything we could to get rid of them, and finally brought them back through a reintroduction process, went up and got the same species that had been missing for about 70 years, brought them back, and they have made their way back into Yellowstone like they never left. We have about 100 wolves park-wide, and that's a lot of what I spend my time guiding. We go out in the before dawn and head out into the wilds of Yellowstone, hoping to find wolves doing what they do, possibly hunting, possibly on territory forays. They are so much fun to watch. You can see why we domesticated them. It's a fascinating animal full of rich cultural history and interesting interactions with each other. I don't have great wolf photos. These are some that my husband took of the Wapiti pack, or I'm sorry, actually this was the Hayden pack some years ago in the winter when he was snowmobiling, doing some work down in the interior of Yellowstone. They are really fun to watch, not just interacting with each other, but with other species. Now these 2 bulls, they don't have much to worry about with this 2-year-old male that was sort of just walking through the scene. They can hunt bison, but their primary food is elk. And we have a much healthier elk population now that we have wolves back on the scene. This was near an old carcass site.
I can see it. Oh,
Ravens flying around in the background.
no, it's just passing.
No, it's walking in. Walking on
Bears and wolves are often found, especially if there's a carcass nearby, and food for everyone. Let's pop into Mammoth Hot Springs here. It's an isolated bit of thermal activity in terms of the fact that it's different and it's outside of the volcano, changing gears a little bit. Different type of mineral too. So it's not, the mineral is not being dissolved out of those rhyolite lava flows. Rather, this is the remnants of ancient seabeds, limestone beds that were laid down potentially even hundreds of millions of years ago, and bubbling up to the surface with that hot water and then depositing and depositing, sometimes up to a couple feet a year. Most of the rest of our thermal features do not grow that quickly. But also the microorganisms, this rich, rich tapestry of life that you can see in miniature, all these little isolated ecosystems up on the Mammoth Hot Springs Terrace is giving us some beautiful colors and views. Liberty Cap, sort of an isolated hot spring. It hasn't been active for a long time. I like the native name for this, Red Mother's Digging Stick. I do appreciate those native names, but that's right there in the Mammoth Hot Springs area. And while we're here, a quick mention of our early history. When Yellowstone was first established, like I said, 149 years ago and 6 months or so, we didn't have a national park service. We didn't really know what we were doing. We were killing off wolves. We were damaging the thermal features. And after the first handful of years, we had kind of an unholy mess on our hands. And so the United States Army marched into Yellowstone in August of 1886. They thought it would be a temporary situation. They were here for almost a little over 30 years and eventually built these structures, the old Fort Yellowstone. Most of these buildings are still here and being used as the National Park Service headquarters. So the National Park Service was established in 1916, and they have managed the national parks ever since. The Army left just shortly after that. So this building right in the center of your screen right here, that was the old bachelor's quarters. That's now the Mammoth Albright Visitor Center. So you can actually go inside and look at some of the displays, get some maps, learn a little bit more about Yellowstone. Some of this is housing, some are office buildings, our superintendent's office. So some of human history here. And then just a quick run back down to Gardner. That's right on. So I'm standing in the park looking down at my house. I'm somewhere right about here, right in the middle of town right now, and surrounded by public lands. And of course, that means surrounded by wildlife. And we just cohabitate with the wildlife around here. This is our little K-12 school, just a block and a half or so from my house. And any given day, especially in the spring or fall, we have bison, pronghorn, elk. We've had bears wandering through the neighborhood. We trick or treat with bear spray around this neighborhood. But it is exciting to live with this wildlife. And again, the Roosevelt Arch, a little bit of an incongruous structure. Mostly we're going for this more wild habitat, but in the early days, the early managers and the Army Corps of Engineers felt like we needed a big structure. You can see on the right-hand side that historic photograph with the steam engine. You can see a little bit of steam puffing out of the engine over here on the right-hand side. And the travelers back then, bringing in their ball gowns and tuxedos, felt like they needed a proper entry to the world's first national park. So you can still drive through the Roosevelt Arch. It's just around the corner from my house. Of course, these days, the big RVs don't go through there, but you yourself can walk through the arch itself as well. Okay, so we are up here in Gardner. We hit Mammoth. We're going to drive back through Mammoth, head out, make a quick stop at the Tower Falls, and then we're going to head out and look for some wildlife. Tower Canyon is sort of the other end of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. I particularly prefer it when it's closed to vehicular traffic and you can ski, but also some terrific geology. I've mentioned the word rhyolite a number of times, those old lava flows, but we also have a little bit of basalt, not nearly as much of the rhyolite, but I'm up next to some basalt columns, columnar basalt, towing my daughter on skis, which I can't do anymore. Fortunately, she's a good skier on her own. But Tower Falls is so beautiful, particularly in the winter, 132-foot cascade that always has a little trickle moving, but does freeze over in the winter and creates these really dynamic ice structures. And then into Lamar Valley, what we call the American Serengeti. You can see wildlife anywhere you are in Yellowstone, but this northeast corner, kind of a quieter corner of the park, is a terrific place to go out in the very early hours. And it doesn't matter what time of year it is or what time of day it is. It has a ton of different moods, all these beautiful, big, wide open landscapes in which you can find a huge suite of wildlife. No matter the time of year, winter offers up a canvas of white. Bears are sleeping, of course, but it's a great time to watch wolves. And you can drive your car out to the northeast entrance. So you can drive through Lamar Valley in your own vehicle in the winter with good tires, I would advise. And this is one of the best places to do some wolf watching or potentially even some wolf listening. What an amazing place to hear the melancholy howl of wolves in the wild. It's such a rare and precious place, and this is one of the reasons why. But of course, a tremendous amount of other animals. You can see the fastest land mammal in North America, the pronghorn, females as well as males with a little young. These little guys can run at 30 miles an hour within a couple of hours of being born. They can clock up to about 60 miles an hour later in life. Bighorn sheep, we saw those big rams earlier, but it's ewes with lambs, so many different types of large mammals. Moose are not very common in the park, but this is a good corner of the park to view moose, especially in those early or late hours. Any wildlife watching is best done at dawn or dusk. I always say 6 to 9 and 6 to 9. Of course, the omnipresent coyote, you can find these guys just about anywhere. Our wild dogs out there doing what they do, hunting, making their way to carcasses when they can, if they can sneak in and grab a bite between the bears and the wolves and the hawks and the eagles that are also at a carcass or a dead animal. And their smaller cousins, the red fox. This guy looks a little scraggly in the summer, so I threw in a winter picture, and this fox is listening for smaller creatures that might be living under the snow before he takes a pounce and will go deep and try and catch a vole or a mouse that's running around under all that snow. We have some more wild cats too. We have 3 kinds of cats: lynx, which nobody ever sees. About every 20 years or so, we have a sighting. We do have a small population of mountain lions, but we also have bobcats. They're a little more commonly seen, although pretty rare. Mostly in the winter over on the west Yellowstone to Old Faithful corridor. We manage to see a few every winter. This guy is consuming. He would not have taken down that elk carcass himself, but he's enjoying a bite that somebody else might have killed, or perhaps it was just winter kill. If a wolf doesn't get to it first, winter is the great equalizer here in Yellowstone. And many smaller animals, things like the yellow-bellied marmot and the red squirrel chattering at you. They sound like dog chew toys as they make their way through the forest. And then this guy was unusual. This is a pocket gopher. You never see them. You see evidence of them all over the ground. But I was out skiing in the late spring, and all of a sudden we saw something in the distance and went over to it. And this little thing came crawling right over and got on my boot and started gnawing on my pant leg. Look at those diggers too. Look at his front paws. So they spend most of their life, you can't even see their eyes. They spend most of their life under the surface of the earth. So we don't see them very often. A little more common, but not an everyday sighting. We have river otter that populate our incredible waterways across the plateau. And we do have just a small handful of amphibians and reptiles. I love this guy, this bull snake. I think he thinks it's a young one. And I think he thought that he was hiding on me. He says, "I'm a rock. I'm just going to blend in." And he didn't move. He could see me, obviously. We do have rattlesnakes. That's the only snake you'd have to think about. And mostly just down here between Gardner and Mammoth on the northern end of the park. And we haven't talked much about our birds, but some common species, the Canada geese, mallards, things that you'd find in a lot of your own neighborhoods, but some more exotic species like the trumpeter swan, the largest bird that can still get up and fly with an incredibly huge wingspan, close to 7-foot wingspan. We have sandhill cranes, and that is one of our 150 or so nesting species, so you might catch them with their young, as well as the American white pelican. A little incongruous to see them up on these high alpine lakes and rivers. They do spend their winters over on the coast. I saw a few folks from San Diego, Southern California. When you see a white pelican in your neighborhood this winter, think about us. And of course, big hawks that might migrate even further south. Things like the harlequin duck that just flit through for a few weeks out of the year. They like this fast moving water. This is a drake. And every spring, I always take note of my first mountain bluebird sighting, this bright flash of brilliant blue color, usually against the last of our remnant snow in the early spring when we finally get our mountain bluebirds back. Ravens and bald eagles, fairly common. Certainly ravens everywhere you go, every parking lot that you're in, you're going to see a raven strutting their stuff, begging for food. Don't feed the animals, respecting wildlife, yet another of our leave no trace ethics. And it is illegal and teaches them some really bad habits. But we're so fortunate to have the American bald eagle, golden eagles as well. And take a look at this left picture and count how many bald eagles are there. Now there's one that's up high in the tree. I'll circle it here. That's actually an immature bald eagle. They don't get their white heads and tail feathers till they're about 4 or 5 years old. But there's that guy, and then 3 below that, another one below that, and actually another one straight down just its head at the very bottom of your screen and covered with ravens. when you hear or see a murder of ravens, that's what we call a flock of ravens, and especially if there's some bald eagles nearby, look around. These birds were sitting on a tree above a carcass. And once you find a carcass or a dead animal, a lot of times you'll find a lot of other species that might be coming in for a bite to eat. We also have osprey or fish hawks as we see them, and how fortunate to be able to catch one as it catches its trout for dinner before it meanders off. And of course, looking down at our feet, not just up at the sky, and remembering these nuances in Yellowstone. We've covered a lot of ground here, and I appreciate you sticking with me on this journey. But I want to take a breath and help us to remember that Yellowstone is not just the big flashy geysers or canyons. It's not just our history, that there is life everywhere we look, microscopic. In the hot springs were like this lichen growing on a rock, on a boulder out in the meadow. Yellowstone is so full of life and patterns that show the life that we might not actually see. Some ermine tracks on a snowy slope one winter. It's full of patterns in the way that the wood forms in all of our forested plateau. Sometimes the life here is the patterns and movements are slow moving, sometimes a little bit faster, that movement, sometimes furiously fast, something escaping for its life. And this mule deer did manage to escape this coyote this particular day. But sometimes it's not fast movement and flashy movement. Sometimes it's the slowest of movements, watching a moon set over Electric Peak. Yellowstone is ancient and wise, and it is also playful and fun. It is harsh and barren, and it is also full of color and vibrancy. Yellowstone gives us a chance to look up in dizzying heights. It gives us a chance to slow down and connect with the things that are the most important, those elemental things, both in terms of our planet and also within ourselves. It is full of death and that cycle of life, new life everywhere that you look. It is endlessly vibrant. It is endlessly bright. And it is endlessly powerful. So I know we have covered a lot of ground today, and I can't tell you how much it means to me to be able to share a little bit of my home space with you. And for those of you planning trips and coming, welcome home to your national park, to this wonderful, extraordinary ecosystem. And for those of you that have been here in the past, you know what an amazing place it is. And even if you can't get here in person, remember our public lands, remember our national parks and our national forests, whatever country you are in, and how critical these wide open spaces are, these nurseries for so many different species, and the genesis of our waterways. As you are purchasing and voting, our public lands need our attention. So thank you all so very much.
And I am absolutely mesmerized in your storytelling ability and the fact that you took us on this journey with you. I think your love, respect, and passion for nature is just so evident, and I totally appreciate it. Coming from my background as a Girl Scout leader, and understanding and respecting our land. Thank you. I mean, I was in awe, and I was in appreciation for everything that you just shared with us. So thank you so much. If I could say, I think that I got every sense, even smell, because you stopped to, you even stopped to share with us the appreciation of the senses and the smells that were coming through. So not only did we see it, I kind of felt I felt what was going on, but I could smell it as well. So thank you for all of that. I am going to help you with the Q&A, I think, because of the technical difficulties. We've gone back and forth a little bit, so I know that you won't see the
Yeah.
questions. So what
And I
I'm
just
gonna
lost
do,
you again. So
that's
I'm
okay.
back to
I talked
square
through it.
one
I
here.
know you weren't
Thank
here,
you.
but the audience was.
Thank you.
But what I'd like to do is start with accessibility, because that's always a big question that comes up. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you can see on a journey if you have mobility issues? Like, can you see a lot from cars? Do you have to get out and hike? You know, are there tours that go through on buses that are guided? Talk to us a little bit about that for accessibility specific issues.
Great question. Yeah, in the heart of summer, you can drive a little over 400 miles of road, and you will see quite a bit. It's always worth stopping and jumping off out of your car to do a boardwalk. You can do like the Fountain Paint Pots is a half a mile boardwalk, a couple of steps, but you can get to the Fountain Paint Pots pretty quickly. Those really spectacular mud pots I showed the video of. So plenty of things like at the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone to step out of your car, walk over to a beautiful viewpoint. If you're so inclined, you can take a longer walk along the edge of the canyon, or even a week-long backpack if you want. There are a tremendous amount of tours offered in the park, everything from, we work with private groups, families that come in, or a couple and just want to have a guide for a day or a week. We work with school groups. There are also larger bus tours that come through the park, come from outside of the park on say a Western National Parks tour, and you'll hit the highlights with that. There's park tours that are run by the same company that run the hotels in the park. So once you are making your lodging, you can look into some shorter, like a day tour that would go around that lower loop and sort of hit the highlights of the geysers and the canyon and the lake shore, and some of what we focused on today. I did see a question about if you don't have a car, it's a tough place without a car.
Right.
It's, yeah, you
But
really
you can
have,
get a bus guided tour or another guided tour from someone else, right? That's
yes,
very
yep,
doable. And you
absolutely.
mentioned your company, Ashea. Who do you guide for?
So Walking Shadow Ecology, Tours of Yellowstone, I own the company. I sort of co-own Walking Shadow. My husband has a consulting, ecological consulting business under the same name. We tacked on Tours of Yellowstone because that's my side of things. I'm not the scientist. And so, yeah, we do, we can pick you up at your lodging if it's local to either the northern end, or we'll meet you down in the interior of the park too, depending on where and what time of year. And then go out for the day. Maybe you're interested in the thermal features and you just want to have somebody along, although those are fairly accessible boardwalks. Most of the big features are fairly accessible. Maybe you want to have a guide for wildlife watching, somebody who will bring along telescopes and binoculars and help us find the wildlife. And so we do a lot of that type of touring. I saw something about wheelchair accessibility. Yes, there's plenty of places all around the park that are chair accessible, whether it's on the boardwalks to the thermals, different places along the canyon rim, and especially a vehicle that has its own lift. I've driven those quite a bit around the park and kind of know where and when to get folks to be able to see the best of the highlights.
So
yes, you can. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let's move to the times of year, obviously, or not so obvious. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the seasons, the temperatures, the crowds, and the pricing if you choose to go to the parks different times of the year?
Yeah, so lodging doesn't really open up until early May, and that's just a couple of hotels. The Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel, as well as the Old Faithful Snow Lodge, are the first hotels to open and have basically the longest season. So they are still open and will be until mid-October-ish. There's hundreds and hundreds of rooms ranging from the lesser expensive cabins. You can get a cabin for, I think on the lower end of the cabins are maybe around a couple $100 a night for in-park lodging, all the way on up to presidential suites for $1,000. The Lake Hotel, like I said, is one of the higher range hotels for kind of that exclusive experience, but anybody can pop in and hang out at any point in the lobby in the sunroom. listening to the quartet.
Do you recommend early spring, late fall? I know summer is obviously a tough time, but in terms of what time of year for crowds is best, and what time of year for wildlife viewing is best, and what time of year for, you just showed beautiful pictures of the spring flowers too. So I was thinking maybe spring is the best. What are you thinking?
So it really depends on your inclination. If you want to do a lot of hiking and get off the road, dead of summer is the best time because you can get across our creeks and rivers. The mountains are accessible. If you would like to see some of the best wildlife earlier in the year, but there's less lodging available, you can run into late season snowstorms. I got turned around in mid-May from a snowstorm, so that can happen any time of the year. But May and early June, mid-June, great times of year for calving and pups and chicks and all of our babies that are popping up across the landscape. Really, the thick of the wildflowers is the dead of summer, July, and that is also the busiest time of year. We are breaking records every year. In-park lodging is booking out about a year in advance. There are other places to stay, like in the town of Gardner. Our town has hundreds of hotel rooms, probably thousands of hotel rooms, and vacation rentals, that sort of thing. West Yellowstone, Cody and Jackson are a little bit further away from the park boundary, but those also have a lot of lodging around there. There's some great web park planning pages on Facebook that you can access. I saw somebody ask about pets. Can pets stay in the, there's a couple of cabins at Old Faithful and Lake that you can have pets in, I believe. But you might want to consider a border town and a vacation rental that can take a pet. A lot of places, of course, don't allow them. Fall is a wonderful time of year. We are not really seeing the slowdown that we used to. I think partially pandemic and national parks, particularly American travelers staying a little more local and not doing some of the international traveling that we might otherwise be doing. We are, like I said, breaking records pretty much every month and every year. And I know it's not just Yellowstone, but a lot of our national parks are breaking records. So it is still busy. But it does quiet down a little bit, pretty much right after this Labor Day weekend. Less population, but still pack your patience any time of year. And then we start moving into when you could potentially get another snowstorm. I've seen it snow every month out of the year, so always be prepared for the unexpected. But by late October, pretty much our lodging facilities and stores and restaurants are totally closed down. And then the whole park shuts down, except for that northern portion between Gardner, Mammoth, and then out to the northeast entrance. That road is accessible year round to wheeled vehicles. The whole rest of the park, the Canyon, Old Faithful, Lake, all of that is shut down for about 2 months until it opens up for the winter season, on which you have to be on a snowmobile or a snow coach. And there are companies outside of the park that operate into the park, and you can stay overnight at Old Faithful, which is pretty exciting. That's fun to do. So it really, and wintertime is extraordinary. It's much quieter, far fewer people, but also, you're not going to be going hiking. You can ski or snowshoe quite a bit. Wildlife is great, but you can't just drive wherever you want. So some limitations in the winter.
So let's talk about some of that wildlife that isn't available to see in the winter, which are the bears. Everybody wants to hear about the bears. So let's talk about, you had a nice little way to remember a grizzly versus a black bear. If you could tell us that again, some people want to reiterate that, but also tell us about the bears. Is there crossbreeding between the bears, or do they stay in their pack? What else can you tell us about the bear community?
Yeah, I am so in love with our bears. I just feel like it's such an honor to live in bear country. So we have black bears and grizzly bears. And again, black bears don't have to be black. So the way to remember the difference, sort of the mnemonic, is if the hump is higher than the rump, that big hump on the grizzly shoulder, better for digging. If the rump is higher than the hump, kind of that big butt, that's a black bear, even if it's not black. They do not interbreed. They're two distinct species. We do have a healthy population of both around the park. Lots of controversy outside of the park. Of course, there's no hunting inside of Yellowstone. They are still on the threatened list under the Endangered Species Act, but there's some movement to delist them. We do have a healthy population, but a lot of their food is under duress, mostly due to climate change, but also development in the park. So keeping close tabs on a healthy population. They're pretty solitary. It's not very usual to see more than one bear at a time, with a few exceptions, mom and cubs, of course, of either species. A mating pair, a courting pair, they don't form long-term bonds. They'll get together for a few minutes, maybe a few hours, and that's it. And she could mate with more than one male. He could mate with more than one female. She probably doesn't even know who the dad is. They have a wonderful adaptation called delayed implantation, where she will become pregnant and the cells begin to grow in what we call a blastocyst, but it just floats around in her uterus all summer long. If by fall, she has not had enough protein, if she's not going into the den around Thanksgiving feeling really fat and sassy and with good health, then the blastocyst aborts. She probably never even knew she was pregnant. If she's feeling good and she's built up a lot of fat reserves, that blastocyst implants and the cubs begin to grow. So they only grow for about 2.5 months, even though she's pregnant for about 10 months. And she sleeps through the birth. They're born in the den, crawl out and begin to suckle, and then we'll see them in the spring. Really a neat thing. Always remember you're in bear country when you're around Yellowstone.
So let's cross over to the hot springs. Okay, so when we talk about the hot springs, I actually thought of this too, and one of the other audience participants put it in there. Can you cook on the hot springs? Can you swim or go into the hot springs? I know in New Zealand they use it for cooking, so that's why I was thinking of that as well. So tell us a little bit about the hot springs and the geology around that.
Yeah, great questions. We are very, very protective of our thermal features because we've done so much damage in the past, back when you could soak in the hot springs. We know a lot more about the water now, things like arsenic and mercury and things you don't necessarily want to marinate in. So we don't allow any soaking in the park in any of our hot springs. But also because they're so fragile. We know how to break them. We know how to damage them. So for the most part, there is no soaking in the hot springs. Now, outside the park, just a couple miles north of me, Yellowstone Hot Springs is a developed hot spring area. Chico Hot Springs, about 45 minutes north of Gardner. Thermopolis, which is out east of Cody. There are some hot springs around that you can soak in. And technically in the park, there's been a lot shut down right now, I think more around COVID and lack of staffing for the National Park Service. We're always under budget woes. But there's a few places where there's some thermal influence into our creeks. And so it raises the temperature. Instead of a cold, icy mountain creek, it's a little bit warmer and you can swim in there. Most of those areas have been shut down both last summer and this summer. But if you ask around at the visitor centers, folks will be able to tell you about that.
Has there been much effect to the hot springs based on global warming?
That's a good question. Not so much yet. There was a paper that just came out really recently talking about some forecasts that we will probably start to see some effects. The water typically, like when you watch Old Faithful erupt, that water fell as rain or snow about 500 years ago. So about the time that Columbus was sailing the ocean blue. It takes that long to percolate down. Up here at the Mammoth Hot Springs, just about 5 miles from here, that water is thousands and thousands of years old. It fell as rain or snow. Some of it percolated down and got near that heat source and drawn back up. So some of the water, though, that's coming out either in a trickle or in an eruption, a big gush, is influenced by groundwater. And because we are we're seeing the effects of climate change a lot, very, very clearly up here, particularly as in a lot of places on Earth, higher latitude, higher elevation places, we're just seeing things happen even quicker than elsewhere in the world. And so the speculation, the forecasts based on some really good data and modeling is that we will see, say, longer intervals with Old Faithful or a sort of an overall reduction in the system, which we're seeing now, fishing closures because of low water flow and such.
Mm-hmm. How about, let's talk a little bit more about the indigenous population. You mentioned them. Let's talk about what provisions, if any, are the park setting for them now? And is it, is hunting available? Is it just for living quarters? What is the indigenous population and the provisions being made?
Great question. We're just now really starting to catch up a little bit on inviting these people back to the table. I've been told by Native friends that there has always been ceremony in the park, but it's not advertised because they were very soundly uninvited to the table.
Right.
Right when I got here in the mid-90s, when we brought the wolves back in 1995, there was a little bit of a movement to invite people to the table from some of these different tribes. Like I mentioned, I think 27 different associated tribes somehow with Yellowstone. Bison management, there's a lot of controversy with our bison. There's a lot of controversy in Yellowstone. So inviting people to the table, there is a quiet movement, and I would love to see some more support for this for a native village. Some of you have been to Yosemite and know of the village that's right there in Yosemite, right down in the bottom of the valley. I would love to see something like that. Mammoth would be a great location, a year-round accessible place to learn a little bit more, not just about our history, but about who is still here. These
Right.
people are still here. So yes, more invitations to the table. There's been some movement, especially for our 150-year anniversary next year, to include some of those voices, some of those indigenous voices. So happy to report that we're slowly moving in the right direction towards some extremely egregious pasts.
Great, that's important. Okay, let us move over to camping. Talk to me about camping, tent camping, RV camping. Are there RV parks and tent parks in the park? And how does that usually go? I would imagine that's a pretty short window in terms of outdoor camping, but you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, unless you're resilient. The Mammoth campground is actually open year round. That's at one of the lower elevations. So if you have a way to do it, or you don't mind winter camping in your tent, that is open year round. It's pretty barren in January, a few RVs up there. But there are also RV parks down at Fishing Bridge. Actually, that's been closed this year, but down at Fishing Bridge, Canyon, near the Lake Hotel, not right near the Bridge Bay RV Park. Grant Village, no camping right at Old Faithful, but just a little bit north of there, there's another campground. So yes, huge campgrounds scattered throughout the park, both everything from tent to RVs, and a number of places outside of the park, adjacent to the park as well.
Are they as hard to reserve as what you were saying about the hotels?
Right now, I would say yes. I would say that the minute that you know that you're coming to Yellowstone, get on your lodging, whether that's a tent campground reservation or, the presidential suite. We're booking up lodging as soon as it's opened, it's booked. That being said, Travel Yellowstone is one website that you can use to access lodging in the park. That's Xanterra, that runs the major concession. And there's also a few first come, first serve sites, but also even if it looks like it's booked, if you continue to call, a lot of people are canceling and changing plans all the time. So there's always a chance of sneaking in if you're willing to stay on the phone and continue being diligent about calling.
Mm-hmm. The tour you took us on today, if we were to do it in real life, how many days or what would we have to leave aside to get that journey and appreciate it the way that you showed it to us?
Including the hikes, I would say 3 days. To really do Yellowstone properly, especially if you're willing to get off the road a little bit for either shorter hikes or just getting off the road, I would advise even as many as 5 days, particularly if you're hiking or more. 3 days to do Yellowstone pretty well, hitting most of the highlights. You can do it in a couple of days, just hitting like the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone and the Old Faithful area. You won't get to see all of the thermal features, but you could do that Grand Loop road system a lot of driving, lots of big distances across Yellowstone, but you could do Yellowstone and hit a few of the highlights in a couple of days, do it a little bit better in 3 days, do it a lot better in 4 or 5 days.
So there was, you talked about driving and how long it takes us, but talk to me about, or all of us, about the difference between doing it in our own private car versus with a tour company. Is there, we've read so much in the last 3 months about access to the parks and how private cars were being turned away, but tour companies were getting in. Talk to us a little bit about that, and where is it now as opposed to what happened in the summer?
Yeah, it's like I said, it's starting to slow down a little bit.
So does that mean you can
parks-
take your private car and get in and get a pass and you're all good?
Yep, pack your patience. It may take you, I was hearing of gate lines for 2 hours to get in the West Gate this summer. So, coming in earlier or later is better than coming in at 9 o'clock with everybody else. Trying to avoid those busiest times is always advisable. But it's just busy. We are, like I said, we're busier than we've ever been. Right now, Yellowstone does not have a reservation system. They are not turning away traffic at the gate. But like that Grand Prismatic Overlook, everybody wants to go see that. You may not be able to get into the parking area in the height of the day, or you'll sit there and idle in your car. Turn your car engines off. Don't idle in the park. We like our clean air. And yes, you can drive motorcycles in the park. So again, packing your patience. Especially if you're here in the heart of the season. Right now, we don't have any kind of reservation system, but there is talk of potentially moving to that at some point. So right now you can drive in anytime, night or day, as long as the park is open. That shoulder season that we closed down some of the roads would be the exception, but keep your ear to the ground. I have a feeling we're going to see some changes.
So there's a lot of talk, or you casually used the term bear spray several times in the presentation. So bear spray is what? Is it pepper spray? What is it for
It is. Yep. It's
Easterners who don't know what bear spray is.
Yeah, it's the same kind of stuff that the mail carriers carry, or maybe ladies in the city, keep it in their purse. It's just
Pepper
a big
spray.
bottle of pepper spray. It's a lot stronger than the stuff that you would find to use on a yappy dog that's biting your ankles versus a 500-pound grizzly bear that's coming
He just
at
left
you.
the room.
We won't even talk about pepper spray with your pup.
Yeah.
It does have a safety on it. I wouldn't even take it off in a closed room, but you pull the safety off and you push it. Now this is a good tool, but you have to know that it's only going to go about 25 feet or so away from you. It has a strong propellant. So personally, I would like to avoid getting that close to a bear to begin with. And so making noise and being aware of habitat. If a bear is coming at me, I'm still going to stand my ground and not run. That's the number one rule. The number one rule is make noise. If a bear is charging you, don't run. Because a lot of times it's a bluff charge, and I've never gotten bluff charged. I've had a few friends, the bear's coming at them and then they turn around at the last minute and run away. But it only goes about 25 feet and it's only going to last for about 7 seconds.
Wow.
So you really got to know what you're doing, and don't fire it off straight. If you fire it off too high, the bear's going to run right over it. So you kind of want to angle it at the ground and hope that bear runs.
Have you ever had to use it?
I myself have not. I've had it out and unholstered with the safety off. But I've never had to spray a bear. I'm seeing a funny comment about, bear spray is no joke. A friend of mine it'll explode in your car if you leave it on a hot day. You have to take it with you. Misfortunate events like that. It'll put you in the hospital if you're not careful. But it does work. I've had a lot of friends that have sprayed bears. I've seen, heard a lot of good stories. Bears do not like it. It causes some respiratory distress, but it doesn't hurt them for the long term. It just teaches them a good lesson that humans are bad news, stay away.
That's a good lesson to do in a harmless way, right?
Right.
So I guess I'm going to end this by asking you one last question that you can kind of go off on a little bit. And if you had to pick just one place in the park, where would that one place be, and tell us why?
That is such an incredibly difficult question. it changes according to the seasons. It changes according to the mood. It changes according to how good my knees are feeling on any given day. You know, for me personally, sitting on top of a mountain or along the edge of a waterway, saw some comments about the Boiling River and the Firehole River. Those are some accessible swimming areas that have not been open for this year. You know, finding a quiet spot, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the south or the north or the northeast or any particular place, but it could be on top of a mountain, it could be on the edge of a meadow. Finding a place where you're not with the millions of people that are in Yellowstone. The boardwalks are busy and popular with good reason. There's extraordinary things happening. Water throwing itself hundreds of feet high out of the ground. You know, it's really amazing colors and all these incredible extremophiles, all these thermal biology, microbiotic mats. But just really finding a spot that's quiet, giving yourself
Stop,
a chance
look,
to
and listen, right?
take a breath. Yep. Hearing the silence, that is such an extremely rare and precious commodity that we have here in a place like Yellowstone, such a big, vast territory. You asked a question earlier about bears. You know, they're fairly solitary. A big male boar might need a home range of 500 square miles. So all of a sudden, 3,500 square miles isn't really that big, but yet we have a healthy population of bears here. So challenging ourselves to preserve those quiet spaces, to preserve our night skies, to preserve a place where we have that scale of habitat for these large grazers and mammals that to me is really the essence of Yellowstone.
And
It's
honestly,
not a particular location.
I think what you say applies to anywhere, right? The ability to stop, slow down, appreciate, look for the little things, appreciate the little things, listen, you know, it's look up, stop,
Use
turn
all your
around,
senses,
all of those
smell,
things. I think
listen,
that's
yeah.
such a very good lesson for all of us, no matter where we are and what we're doing. And I think that's a wonderful way to leave it, because I think if we can all stop and appreciate a little bit more, we'll get so much more out of life, whether we're traveling or whether we're sitting in our homes. So thank you for reminding us to do that.
Thank you so much, Mara. This is really fun. And thank you to everybody who stuck with me through the technical difficulties. If I didn't get to a question, you can email me at info@yellowstone.education. Walking Shadow Ecology Tours of Yellowstone is our little guiding company. And I'd love to hear from anybody with some follow-up questions if I didn't get to it. But I genuinely appreciate your time and your attention and your curiosity and your interest in this place. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.